And Mexicans are very hardworking people. I've had Mexican friends come and visit me here, and they say, woof, you can have a lot of fun in Spain. It's not like Mexico where we work all the time. That's their opinion. But look at this horrible productivity. And then you have to really start thinking about that. It's like this thing with the standard criticism of productivity shocks in a real business cycle model. You say, oh, how can productivity go down? People forget things? No. How do things go down? I'm going to show you my story from Mexico. The government just undertakes policies that systematically pushes resources, workers, and capital investment into inefficient firms, into horrible firms. That's how you destroy an economy. And that's what the government did in Mexico in the 1980s. Now, they've been trying not to do that since about 1988, and it hasn't been working so well. I mean, they've been getting economic growth, but nothing spectacular, nothing like the 2% we're looking for. And every time I go to Mexico, that's what I spend my time discussing with my friends. Okay, so what we did, this is a chapter in the book, myself working with my brother. Oh, if you thought all the papers written by that guy Kehoe were written by me, go on thinking that, that's fine. But I happen to have a brother who's an economist. And two Chilean friends of ours, Rafael Burgoyne and Raimundo Soto. And what we wanted to see is why what happened in Chile was so different than what happened in Mexico. So here's a methodology that you can tack on to the methodology I talked about before. Try to look at countries that experience similar shocks and see why one did better than the other and see if you can identify the differences with government policy. That's what we tried to do here. Or go and look at the current crisis in the United States and compare it with that 81, 82, 83 crisis and see why things were different, and see if you can identify any differences with institutions or government policies. You can't get anything more different than that. This is what happened in Chile and Mexico, and here I'm detrending by 2%. That just shifts the picture up and down. You're going to get the same difference. Chile had a crisis where it started out worse, but my gosh. Chile, starting in the end of 1984, became one of the fastest growing countries in the world. And Mexico just stagnated. Now, I'm doing two things differently than you'll see journalists and some economists doing. I'm always dividing by the number of people. That's really important for countries like this. Mexico had population growth at the beginning of this. They're going through a demographic shift now of 3.5% per year. So at that point, if Mexico was only growing by 2%, everybody was getting poorer. I'm also taking out the 2% trend. That is far less important here. The big thing is dividing by the number of people. So I'm going to show you the model, and I'm going to show you two numerical experiments with the model. This is going to be a far more successful exercise than Cole-Ohanian. I did it. It's kind of a joke, but it's far more successful at least. So it's going to show us the kind of thing we want to do. First, I'm just going to take the basic model and see how much productivity can explain. And it actually goes a long way to explaining the difference. But it doesn't get absolute quantities that well. And so what I'm going to do is put tax reforms in the model that lower the tax on capital. This is something stressed by Shea and Parker, for example, on why Chile grew so fast. It's also going to be why Mexico didn't do quite as badly as we might expect it would. So here's my general equilibrium model, the kind of things you would teach people in a first-year graduate macro course. Had to make sure. So I have an intertemporal utility function that depends on consumption and leisure. All these parameters, usually beta, not in a particular exercise I'm going to do now. Instead, I'm going to make beta be the same across countries, let something else be different. Usually beta, the discount factor, and certainly gamma, the weight on consumption versus leisure, are things I'm going to have to calibrate so that it looks like what the economy does in more normal times. H is going to be the number of possible hours. In weekly terms, I'm going to think you'd be just at the point of dying if you worked 100 hours a week. So you grad students here, I'm not sure how hard these professors push you. But you know, when I tell grad students in Minnesota this, they find this readily believable. That before you'd say, oh, I'm dying of work, we'd have to be pushing you to get close to 16 hours a day, right? I mean, after that, you get minus infinity utility, and we call that dead. Okay, so then I put that into a model, and we've experimented, and a lot of my recent work, I just had a paper published with Kim Rule in the Journal of Development Economics on this, is trying to make this be an open economy model, putting in all kinds of other frictions in order to get certain features of the data. I'm just showing you the most basic model now. So this is going to be closed economy. That's real violence to the Mexican reality, especially in more recent years. And what's different about it is going to put in a tax on capital. Because we read in the literature papers like that of Shea and Parker that stressed, especially for Chile, that that was the essential thing about the recovery. And then the feasibility constraint, of course, is just what goes with that production function that I showed you a while ago. So I'm going to calibrate this model. And actually what I'm going to do, usually I calibrate the beta, or we could call this estimation, but it's actually just a simple nonlinear least squares estimation, in order to replicate what's going on during relatively stable periods. So we look at 60 to 80. And we imputed what taxes would have to look like to get the investment consumption trade-off. And we look at what labor supply and consumption are to get gamma, right? And gamma is just that utility weight that tells us the labor-leisure trade-off. So here are the numerical experiments. One of them is just run the model with productivity. The other is put in a tax reform, and in the paper we discussed this a lot, why we decided to do it this way. The timing of our tax reform is a little bit off in Chile. We just choose it so it's the identical tax reform, so that we don't want taxes to be too important in this model. We've got to put them in because the literature stresses it, and it works, not because we want to concentrate on taxes.